And that brings us to number 3, enslavement and execution of enemies. Nice. This all comes from natural slave theory, which comes from Aristotle, who wrote, "From the hour of their birth, some are marked for subjugation, others for rule." I find it very interesting that this predestination just is philosophy has survived intact right up to the current era. It is the hallmark of corrupt imperialism, whether we're talking about Nazis, Japanese imperialism of the 1930s, Marxism, Islam, French Revolution, or even Darwinian eugenics. The premise here is that might makes right, a thing called natural order, and it justifies the existence and perpetuation of an unrestrained, supreme ruling class, something our founding fathers absolutely abhorred. The slavery characteristics of this particular metric is clearly seen in the slavery practices throughout Rome. According to several historical accounts, 1/3 of the men in Rome were estimated to be slaves. Now, there were no records of women and children, which is presumed to be greater. Some historical estimates say anywhere from 45 to 60% of the population of the Roman Empire were slaves. That seems to be a pretty high number to me. In fact, according to historian Marshall Foster, in its 800 years, Rome enslaved and murdered more people than all the ancient civilizations combined. When it comes to execution of enemies, the fate of the Carthaginians is a good example of the unbridled, over-the-top hatred seen in paganist human cultures. In the Third Punic War, hundreds of thousands of men, women, children, even their animals, were wiped out mercilessly. And then for good measure, the Romans salted the ground so that nothing could grow there again. This malevolent retribution was repeated in 66 AD when Titus surrounded Jerusalem, and the rest of Israel for that matter, killing over 1 million, gutting their entrails looking for gold as was rumored, and then starved the survivors and sent them away as slaves. Pretty bad, right? This doesn't happen today, does it? Think for a moment of the atrocities of Hitler's Holocaust, Pol Pot's killing fields, Stalin and the gulags, Muhammad, and even Papa Doc Duvalier. Do that comparison, and I think you'll begin to understand history as our founding fathers did. And now I can tell we need a much-deserved dandelion break. Because sometimes it just gets to be too much. Deep breaths, everyone. The truth is that an objective look at history is often brutal, filled with oppression and terror. This is what our founding fathers understood. Breathe deep. Feel better? Let's keep going. Number 4, the rejection of absolute morality. See, Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Elizabeth Taylor at the Battle of Actium. You know, I'm so afraid people aren't going to get that. So you are paying attention. Good. Well, after Actium, Octavian renames himself Augustus Caesar, priest of the gods, declaring himself as a god and kicking off 40 years of imperial dictatorship. From that time on, in Rome, the Caesars were God. and lived beyond moral limitations, which they imposed on their inferior subjects at just about every level. But Mark Antony's rejection of family and country is nothing compared to the rest of the Roman elites. Let's take a look at them. Take Caligula, for example. Now, while the media focuses on his immoral lifestyle, objective historians note his insatiable lust for blood. On a whim, he ordered the murder of his entire palace staff. While true open incest with sisters and open orgies in the palace, Caligula was more noted by his fellow Romans for closing the granaries to watch the people starve for his enjoyment. So evil was Caligula that when he finally died, Rome celebrated for 3 years. And Tiberius, delighted in torturing enemies and then throwing them into the sea to watch them flail without arms and legs. In fact, the history of torture and execution by Gene Calloway, as if the world really needs such a thing, notes that Tiberius and Caligula were chief innovators with several new methods of torture and execution each. Nero is another example of the pagan ruling class. I mean, this guy gutted his own mother. Tacitus details an elaborate ceremony on an open barge in the middle of Rome where Nero places a bridal veil on his male lover Pythagoras, with their wedding bed for all to see. The next day, Rome burns to the ground. 3/4 of the city destroyed. To do what? To build a larger palace for himself. And for a scapegoat, to distract and mobilize the masses, he blames his fellow Romans, his own subjects, Christian citizens. And this starts the first of 10 Christian persecutions. Before committing suicide, ending the lineage of the Augustus Caesars, he orders the crushing of the Jews. Let's try that again. He orders the crushing of the Jews. Total destruction of Jerusalem in 68 AD, carried out by Titus. And that brings us to number 5, the focused persecution of Christians. Focused persecution of meek, moral, caring, contributing Christians and Jews in society with total hatred takes place in all humanist cultures, I contend, without fail. As for Rome, by 300 AD, Rome actively persecuted Christians who had increased to about 12% of the population. Christians and other common citizens were viewed as being weak, oddly enough because of their compassion, because supposedly compassion is a weakness to the Roman mind. Remember contentio and victory in the definition of. So because of that, and this supposed obvious weakness, they were torched, eaten by animals, and crucified all the way up until 312 AD. Persecutions eventually went beyond just the Colosseum. They extended to the general population, with mass exterminations. Whole cities, whole Roman armies obliterated. So the question is, why does this occur? Well, there is a reason. See, the religions of idols, false gods, can be manipulated and twisted, as we've discussed. And as we'll see, the Christian religion, the true Christian religion, cannot be twisted, at least not for very long. Perhaps because the faith produces changed hearts. You're probably all witnesses to that. Something that secularists just cannot understand. Because we claim relationship with God. And that relationship also produces unstoppable armies, men and women with no fear of pain or death. Quoting Marx, who I believe is paraphrasing Nietzsche, in any progressive society, it is the Christian religion that must be stopped at all cost, for it is the reflection of hope that fuels unwavering resistance. The fate of the Theban legion demonstrates a supernatural disdain for Christ's people that's repeated throughout history. See, despite the good deeds, the competence, the honor, rulers constantly ignore all and crush innocent, loyal, subject Christians. Expect it. In 284 AD, Diocletian, the last of the Christian persecutions, carried out an order through Maximian, a political trap, ordering a 6,000-strong Christian legion to France. To do what? To kill Christians. When they arrived, they wrote a declaration and sent it back, stating, "We are loyal. We are your best soldiers. But we will not do this." So Maximian sent legions 60,000 strong. And when they arrived, they beheaded 1/10 of the Theban legion on the spot. When they asked the others if they would indeed comply, and they said no, they killed the rest, often through crucifixion. A few years later, though, it's interesting to note that both Caesars were dead, and a young man replaced them, told to conquer by this sign, the cross, ending the persecutions, including the persecutions of the children of the Theban legion. And that is why biblical Christians have been persecuted throughout history. Their very nature defies tyrannies. With their personal accountability and their unwavering faith in God and His tenets. But how far will tyrannies go in their persecution? And how is that relevant to us today? We'll answer those questions on the last and concluding installment of the first episode of a 13-episode series, A Heritage Lost, The American Truth.